Humans can't get enough of a good story. Like a kid in a candy store, we'll take everything we can get our mitts on. And, just like those sugar-craving kiddos, we're addicted. We don't even know it. Stories are the ultimate shapeshifters, able to become whatever we need them to be. We're so wrapped up in the stories of our own lives, it's damn near impossible to see beyond them. Which is a whole different level than a kid scrounging for sweets, because we get high on our own supply. Somewhere along the way, we seem to have forgotten that we hold the keys to the candy shop. Today, we're going full meta and telling a story about stories, because it sure seems like the stories of our individual lives and that of larger culture are rapidly changing. So it seems fair to ask, what do these changes look like? And how do we navigate them? But first, we need to look back before we can move forward. A long time ago, in a galaxy we call home, there was a fantasy movie set in space with sci-fi cowboy samurai that started an unstoppable money-making franchise. Embedded within this story was a process known as the hero's journey. And this is where our part of the saga begins. Joseph Campbell proposed the hero's journey in his book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, as a theory that all ancient mythology tells one core story, that of the human psyche's development from child to adult and ultimately to a fully realized human. Storytelling unlocked! He cracked the code! 12 clear steps that seem to correlate with human development, structure to make sense of the world and our place within it, a map of our hidden psychological patterns. Sounds great, right? Well, the Western world sure thought so. This framework has been promoted as the template for modern storytelling. The success of Star Wars ensured the hero's journey was replicated in movies, TV, comics, books, and this has been transferred into cosplay, conventions, religions, and as a philosophical guide for how a person should live their life. The influence of the hero's journey is everywhere in our culture. You might be wondering, so what? Isn't that a good thing? Well, let's hear it from the man himself, by way of narrative first. As Campbell says, the individual, through prolonged psychological disciplines, gives up completely all attachment to his personal limitations, idiosyncrasies, hopes, and fears, no longer resists the self-annihilation that is prerequisite to the rebirth and the realization of truth, and so becomes ripe, at last, for the great at-one-ment. His personal ambitions being totally dissolved, he no longer tries to live, but willingly relaxes to whatever may come to pass in him. He becomes, that is to say, an anonymity. Now that's the juice, an unassailable psycho-spiritual storytelling phenomenon. I've read several of Campbell's books, including The Heroes with a Thousand Faces. I thought he made a lot of good points. I've watched the 1988 Bill Moyer series, Joseph Campbell and the Power of Myth, and I found it quite inspiring. I enjoy Star Wars, Lion King, The Matrix. All of these are portrayed as prime examples of Campbell's theory. I write fantasy and science fiction novels, which are genres thoroughly steeped in the hero's journey. And yet, my bullshit radar is activated when encountering anything presented as, this is the way it is. Which, in the case of the hero's journey, is a monomyth that contains all stories. Doesn't quite feel right, a little too ambitious. Is this theory an accurate, holistic representation of our history, or simply a self-fulfilling prophecy? Well, through the process of enculturation, a person learns the traditional content of a culture and then assimilates its practices and values. Or, as biologist Robin Wall Kimmerer states, the stories we choose to shape our behaviors have adaptive consequences. Essentially, we're stuck in a continuous feedback loop. Our stories and our behaviors are intimately connected. Author Jeremy Lent expands on this concept. Metaphors are more than just techniques to communicate ideas. They form foundational structures of thought in the human brain that we unconsciously use to construct our worldview and shape our value system. Metaphors matter. And what is a story if not an extended metaphor? A thing regarded as something else, especially something abstract. So it seems like constantly repeating a monomyth is likely to create a monoculture. Like with agriculture, chop down the forest to make way for endless fields of corn, exchange diversity for progress, replace wilderness with pavement, chaos into control. And since we're all under the influence of enculturation, what happens when everyone believes that they're the hero? that anyone or anything different than them is an evil that must be defeated. CBC Ideas has something to say about this. Everything depends on whether the one in the Matrix is going to be successful or not. The hero is going to save the world or not. And that's, I think, the political danger. If everyone is thinking that they're the hero, then there's no possibility of thinking with compassion from the point of view of the other people who are experiencing completely different stories. This comment does imply a long-term consequence of ramming a monolith down culture's throat. Rugged individualism at all costs. Pull yourself up by your own bootstraps and whatnot. Again, you might be wondering, what's the big deal? In the book, Escape from Evil, Ernest Becker says, whatever side of heroism we look at, one thing is certain. It is an all-consuming activity to make the world conform to our desires. Which is all good if the hero is, as Campbell says, becomes ripe at last for the great at-one-ment, his personal ambitions being totally dissolved. But how often does this actually play out? CBC Ideas leans towards, not so often. Despite the pretense that these are ancient stories conveying what Joseph Campbell would call boons from the transcendent deep, these are basically stories that are told by those in power to convince others they should have power. Doesn't sound quite as numinous or sacred when framed that way. I agree that reclaiming our personal and collective power is crucial to navigating this era we find ourselves in. But the elements of the hero's journey are easily hijacked by an economic ideology like late-stage capitalism. Our focus is placed on overcoming outer obstacles, learning how to survive as an individual, defeating rivals, and being reborn as more than human to receive a higher social status. And this is achieved through sacrifice, risk-taking, hard work, and these are all useful values, but they are far from the only ones on the list. What about kindness, compassion, creativity? Otto Rank, a psychoanalyst and philosopher, enters the conversation with some brutal insight. All of our human problems, with their intolerable sufferings, arise from man's ceaseless attempts to make this world into a man-made reality, aiming to achieve on earth a perfection which is only to be found in the beyond, thereby hopelessly confusing the values of both spheres. Oh, calling it like it is. Maybe we just need to get out of our own way. But then again, maybe Campbell nailed it and we're just not getting the message. Maybe we need to try harder, be better, do more. Or maybe, just maybe, what if we stop fighting? This ain't no place for no hero. It may sound like I'm coming down hard on my man Joe and his wildly successful theory. So I'd like to reiterate that I believe Campbell's insights have made an invaluable contribution to how we view mythology and how we can use mythic understanding to enhance the quality of our storytelling. Being able to appreciate the impact that myth has on our daily lives helps us to make sense of symbols and the meaning they impart. These qualities are fundamental to human expression. They're like the compass and rudder on a ship, offering opportunity to choose our direction. Otherwise, we're just adrift at sea. Throughout history, the names and settings may change, but the core themes remain constant. Themes associated with deep-rooted hopes and fears. One example is the dark side of technology that appears in the story of Prometheus around 2,700 years ago. And then it reappears in Frankenstein 208 years ago, again in the Terminator series, and more recently in Oppenheimer. Then there's a theme of rebirth or transcendence that goes back 4,000 years to the story of Inanna's descent into the underworld. And then there's Jesus, you may have heard of him, has a similar event 2,000 years later, as does Superman in modern times, or Beyonce when she left Destiny's Child and became Queen Bey. Dramatica was introduced in 1994 by Chris Huntley and Melanie Ann Phillips. It's a complex, comprehensive structure that I can only touch on here. Stories are about solving problems. Sometimes solving those problems require the centerpiece of a story, the main character, to undergo a major transformation in how they see the world. Sometimes they don't. There is nothing inherently better about a story where the main character transforms. The whole spiritual transformation aspect of Campbell's theory isn't at play within Dramatica. Instead, this framework prefers a more down-to-earth approach. The main character comes to a story with some emotional baggage, the influence character enters, and by virtue of her presence, brings the main character's baggage to the surface. she impacts him. One way or another, the two argue over the proper way to solve the problems in the story until, at the end, the main character has to come to a decision. Either keep doing things the way he always has, or change and adopt the influenced character's way of seeing things. Many examples come to mind, particularly the tried and true features produced by Pixar. Dramatica seems to have more give and take than the classic hero's journey. Character interaction is emphasized, rather than overcoming outside forces. Interpersonal relationships drive the story. And then there's The Virgin's Promise, which is more of a mirror to the hero's journey, and it was proposed by Kim Hudson in 2009. The Virgin's Promise has two meanings, and in a nutshell, the first meaning is the community's belief that the Virgin has agreed to live up to their expectations. She has made a promise to them. The second speaks to the Virgin's unproven potential that lies dormant within her, longing to come to life. The Virgin begins by conforming to the wishes of others, and eventually learns to hear her inner voice and bring it to life. It is the journey to creative, spiritual, sexual awakening. Community is at the heart of the Virgin's Promise, learning how to be authentic to yourself in order to enhance the overall network of relationships. Rather than going on an epic quest, the protagonist had to discover to nurture what's already there, but is currently suppressed. The hero leaves the village to ward off danger before it arrives and creates havoc in a foreign land. The antagonist is the personification of this foreign land and is basically evil and rightly destroyed. The Virgin lives in a kingdom that is in need of change. The kingdom is stagnating and needs to allow more individual freedom. Growth of the Virgin forces growth of the kingdom. I love this take. What happens after the dragon is slain? Or when the enemy isn't an obvious other? What if the problems are closer to home? What if the problems are built into home itself? The Virgin is learning to be self-fulfilling. Her highest purpose is to overcome her father complex and make choices in her own life based on her own values. She must follow her passion and know joy and love. She is about awakening her sexuality, spirituality, and creativity, and making her dreams come true. This is a facet of human experience that the hero's journey is ill-equipped to portray. It's not any fault of the hero's journey, which has its own distinct, useful core of themes designed for particular circumstances, but Hudson's theory provides clarification for another way of being in the world, closer to stories like Little Miss Sunshine or Ever After, rather than The Wizard of Oz. While the hero is aided by allies, the Virgin's friend sees her potential and supports her in her quest to be true to herself out of love rather than personal gain. The hero meets allies along the way who share a common goal, but they don't have to like each other, and they simply have to share a common purpose. While it's possible to have female characters fit within the hero's journey, it seems like this theory is describing more of a masculine pathway, meaning that a female character in this role is likely to be that of a warrior, just as a man would be. Think of Rey in the most recent Star Wars arc. The Virgin's Promise seems to be describing a more feminine path. A male can easily be placed in this role, but he's more likely to be a healer. And when talking about mythology, it's useful to remember that we're viewing things symbolically, meaning that these are not male or female stereotypes, but more so how certain energies are perceived to move. Think of the yin-yang symbol, also known as the Taijitu, which represents masculine and feminine energy together in harmony. Everybody is a mixture of these forces and discovers their own sense of equilibrium. So, if these theories are two sides of the same coin, or just the same story counterbalancing opposite sides of the spectrum, does that mean Dramatica could be situated somewhere in the middle? Not necessarily. The key difference being that Dramatica isn't concerned with character transformation, whereas this is a crucial element to the hero's journey and the Virgin's Promise. Because as individuals and culture, the stories we choose to tell depends on our own taste, on our preferred flavor. Do we like our candy to be super sweet and melt in your mouth? Or maybe we like it to be chewy and on the sour side. Either way, we're getting that sugar fix. There are also many examples of stories featuring the trickster, which is an archetype who is uniquely suited to doing what the hero cannot. But this may have to be its own video sometime in the future. Now that we have some context, what is it within stories, the hero's journey in particular, that keeps us coming back for more? Maybe, just maybe, we're addicted to the struggle. The Invisibles is a graphic novel by Grant Morrison that ran from 1994 to 2000. You may not have heard of it, but this series has cast a wide influence, including movies like The Matrix. This story follows a secret group known as the Invisibles, who battle evil forces bent on controlling every aspect of humanity. Pretty much every conspiracy theory you've ever heard of is in here. It all fits together pretty well. The eclectic crew of badasses includes an assassin, a telepath, a bruja, a kung fu master, and the newest incarnation of Buddha. There are magicians and demons, time travel and gods, spirits and futuristic technology. This sounds like a classic example of the hero's journey, right? Good versus evil, light versus dark, win at all costs, give yourself up to a higher cause and transform in the process. The Invisibles is all of this, until it isn't. Spoiler alert, they defeat the cosmic evil baddies, but that isn't the end of the story. A time skip into the future shows us the assassin, named King Mob, who is the former leader of the Invisibles, has now chosen the way of nonviolence. He seems to be involved in the worldwide distribution of a synthetic product that other people are using to go through their own Invisibles phase. And this is from the comfort of their own beanbag chairs. In a chemical, digital, astral trance, people are able to blast through this stage of development, a process which seems to be awakening to the interplay of light and darkness in the world, choosing a side, learning skills and feeling super duper special about it, fighting against the other side, and then defeating them only to realize they are your reflection, and then transcending into whatever comes next. Peace, love, wisdom maybe. The Invisibles is a complex and infinitely layered narrative. But this is the element that stood out most to me, along with the time suit. That thing is up there with the DeLorean in terms of cool time travel units. Now this allegory within the Invisibles is quite similar to the process of the hero's journey, which makes me wonder, what if Campbell's theory isn't a monomyth, but simply a phase of development, a natural developmental stage that we are all gradually outgrowing, initiation into a more expansive way of being. Kind of like being an angsty teenager who complains and fights against parental rules until finally becoming an adult, then good old ma and pa toss over the keys to the car. The open road awaits. In the Invisibles, it's Jack Frost, the foul-mouthed incarnation of Buddha who saves the day and buys time for the rest of humanity to catch up. And he does this without killing anyone. King Mob witnesses this event and makes changes in his own life accordingly because he sees firsthand what's possible, that the story can change. Here's an existential banger from Jack. Don't believe nothing you hear. Trust what you know. Remember, it's all just a mirror we made to see ourselves in. And when the Archons come and it all turns inside out with scary miracles, it's only all the things you left outside when you were building your little house called me, eh? We've identified how stories and behavior creates a feedback loop that shapes our internal beliefs and our outer actions. So who are we when these stories are changing? And since 2020, we've all gotten acquainted with change, whether we liked it or not. Structures and systems that once seemed immovable have been shaken, and some have collapsed. Many that are still standing now bear visible cracks. Individual and collective beliefs have been rattled, subjected to the same shifts as their physical representations. This is the uncomfortable bit, the awkward transitionary phase, like when letting your hair grow and it's in between styles, making you look like a rejected member of the Beatles, which is almost where I'm at. So I have to decide, do I cut it back or let it grow? Choose wilderness or civilization? It's pretty ridiculous how tactile and mundane these overarching themes can be. Anyway, this next bit might just show us a middle path. Author and activist Alexis Wright calls this process an inward migration. Most often, a solitary journey, a turning away from the bombarding speed of reality, hitting your very sense of being and destroying your soul. It's where we go to slowly pick things apart, to reimagine our world in new ways, and sometimes we come out on the other side with a map of how to make sense of our world. This is slightly more intense than a rough haircut, but I think you can see how this sentiment ties into our discussion about myth and story. Because a story is a lie to get the truth. We all know the story isn't true, not totally true anyway, but we're willing to suspend our disbelief for entertainment, for connections, and for meaning. The problem arises when we become attached to the lie and we take the story as reality, setting it atop a psychological house of cards. Intuitively, we recognize that any change could cause a collapse, so even the briefest of challenges triggers a survival reflex, an internal defense mechanism to protect our wobbling house of cards. This biological programming of fight or flight is often rationalized to be our bedrock as individuals, our key to survival. Yet how can this be? Humanity could never have persisted through any significant change with such a rigid guiding principle. adaptation and evolution are much more fluid than we typically acknowledge, because then we'd have to acknowledge the uncertainty within our world and our lack of control over it. This is an elegant process that deserves more than the spasms of unconscious reactions enacted by the wiring in our reptilian brains. We have the power of choice, a point that is elaborated by Wright. When you move into the realm of your own sovereignty of mind by shielding yourself from the kinds of interference that rob you of the ability to think straight, that sap your spirit, or block you from seeing and making your own judgment, then you are able to govern your own spirit and imagination. Oh baby, now we're getting to the good stuff. As we've seen, stories shape the underlying structure of our worldview, and each unique structure is a way we can tap into our own imagination. Every human creation ultimately emerges out of the imagination because they began as inspiration, ideas, and thoughts. What is first seen in our mind's eye is then expressed verbally and physically. The invisible is transformed into actions and objects. The specific forms that we use most often become beliefs, which gradually solidify into just the way things are, otherwise known as a paradigm. We're in an endless feedback loop where reality influences how we live and is in turn co-created by how we choose to live. You may want to pause the video here for a minute and ponder on that.
You don't see my, oh shit, what the hell did he?
Our current ways of storytelling seem unworthy of fulfilling this collaborative process. At the very least, they're due for an upgrade. The imaginative engine is bogged down by inertia and could use a jumpstart of inspiration. Pathways of belief have deepened into ruts. When this happens, it's often difficult to imagine something different because encountering any newness is rare and we literally cannot see it for what it is. This is called paradigm blindness, and it occurs when a belief system has outlasted its original purpose. Paradigms are useful, otherwise they wouldn't exist. They're there for a reason. They're just not meant to last forever. Luckily, paradigms can shift. One way to facilitate a shift is introduce new stories, which in turn enables us to see ourselves and our world differently because a person believes what they see. As Wright says, this is where we fashion and refashion and imagine the stories we want told, where we catch the essence of a story before it drifts away or before it is overrun by the power of those other stories created by the score in this country to distract our thinking. These can be old stories told in a new way, ancient wisdom in a modern package. Wright asserts the need for those who will search ceaselessly through the backwaters of their minds, hearts, and souls to find ways to powerfully articulate the new stories, the new sagas, the new imagination, and the new epics of the world, inspired by their doubt, fear, love, longing, and wondering. In my experience, beauty has been a useful perspective in assisting an aim that's similar to what Wright here is describing. Beauty because it can smash and merge paradigms with ease. Beauty as a synthesis of so many contradictions. Beauty as a momentary unifier of paradox. Beauty as a compass for truth. As a writer, I've encountered stories that arrive like a bolt of lightning out of the sky. Stories that are seemingly empowered by their own energy, and they're just ready to be expressed. All that's left for me to do is to find the courage to share what's already been seen in my imagination. You may be wondering, what am I supposed to do with all of this? Well, here's a formula that I found helpful in providing clarity and direction. Paradox plus nuance multiplied by passion equals expression. A paradox is a seemingly absurd or self-contradictory statement or proposition that when investigated or explained may prove to be well-founded or true. It can be a situation, a person, or things that combine contradictory features or qualities. Remember our friend the Taijitu? It's a great example of a paradox. It's two things that are actually one thing, but this one thing can only exist because of unique individual parts. It's both and neither and all. Don't worry if this isn't making any logical sense. It's not supposed to. A paradox is fundamentally beyond rationality, which is your first clue as to why it's so powerful. Nuance is a subtle difference in or shade of meaning, expression, or sound. An example is, let's say when comparing a hot dog on a slice of white bread with a squirt of ketchup versus handmade pasta complete with fresh herbs and sauce made from scratch. These are both meals, they have the same function, but nuance tends to provide a more layered and meaningful portrayal of the complexity of being human. So imagine if you had a guest coming over to visit. Which of these two meals would you rather serve? Which would they be more likely to appreciate? In storytelling, nuance is that secret sauce that an audience connects with because it allows them to see a reflection of themselves within the art. And then there's passion. What lights you up? This is the fire that burns hotter when you give it attention, the part of you that somehow gives as much to yourself as it does to others. But why do any of this if stories are a secret addiction? Why feed the beast at all? Well, as Homer Simpson is famously quoted, to alcohol, the cause of and solution to all of life's problems. Just swap out alcohol with story in this scenario. Addiction is the seeking to fill an inner gap with an external source. When we sense a lack inside of ourselves, and we'll do anything to make that go away because our short-term impulse for relief overpowers everything else. Comfort becomes the only goal. Eventually, we stop seeing the object that's fulfilling this desire and we become fixated on the outcome. Comfort, remember that? Life slides into a transactional affair, an endless balancing act that always leaves us feeling unsteady. Addiction keeps a person locked in place, unable to move. This is easy to see with a drug addiction. But what about something more invisible, something like a story? And this brings us back to the heart of our case study here. Why the continued need to tell the hero's journey above all else? Storytelling about the victory of good over evil, of righteous violence, of exerting force on the natural world, achievement, productivity, control. A story about leaving home as a youngin' and kicking ass on a quest because, turns out, you're the chosen one. This is a fun story. It's comfortable. It's what we've known. But as we've seen today, it's far from being the monomyth that it's been touted to be. And that's okay. Could it be that we lost sight of the gratifying object, the story itself, and got wrapped up in the outcome, how the hero's journey makes us feel? Powerful, special, inevitable. So maybe it's time to shift our focus from the outcome to the process. Embrace paradox and nuance so we can share stories that are true for here and now, stories that convey the connections of person to person, human to environment, and with the more than human, stories of interbeing, those relationships that help to make us who we are, that move us all forward. No more waiting around for the chosen one or forcing ourselves to mimic this example. Instead, let's find the courage and vulnerability to follow our passion, whatever it may be, to express ourselves creatively. Expression is the light that illuminates how we experience the world, and it's revealed in an infinite number of forms. So, may we allow ourselves to accept the fire that is ours to share. May we put down the candy and cultivate something a little more nourishing. And if any of this resonates with you, please hit like and subscribe to get the algorithm working for us. I hope this has helped to awaken you to your authentic creative self.